Hi, and welcome back to Lisa's Stamp Studio. The technique I have for you today uses this. It's just a stencil. We're going to lay some color on the cardstock. We're going to emboss over that stencil background, and that's going to create this stunning card. I've got lots of tips to share with you along the way to make this really easy for you to create at home. If this is your first time visiting my YouTube channel, I would love to have you subscribe. Click that small bell icon that's next to it so you'll receive notifications of when I share a new video, as well as when I'm live right here on YouTube. Let's head over the stamp table and let's get started on today's card. Here's a good close-up of that card technique that we're going to be creating. This is actually called the Joseph's coat, but I put a twist to it. So instead of embossing with rubber stamp images, we're going to be using a stencil today. We're going to begin by laying color down on our cardstock. You'll want to make sure that you have your work surface protected. You're going to want to cut your cardstock bigger than what you're going to need. This one is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, but if you feel comfortable going even bigger than that, that is fine. We're going to end up trimming it down to fit our card. I'm going to be using 2 colors for my technique. My first one is Mango Melody, and to lay down that color, I'm going to be using a sponge dauber. I love these because you can put your finger up inside, which is going to allow you to control the coverage. Now, typically when I'm using these and I'm adding a sponge background, I'll tap off some of the ink once I ink up my sponge dauber, just so I can control the coverage. But for this technique, you'll want a density of color. All you're going to do is pick random areas on the cardstock to fill with this color. So I've got my dauber ready, and I'm just going to rub it on. Now, whether you rub it or you scrub it on, it really doesn't matter because remember, we're going to add some stenciling over the top, which is going to break down the background image. I'm going to repeat this process in various areas of the cardstock. Leave some room between the colors because we are going to add another. For my second color, I'm going to use Coastal Cabana, and I'm going to be doing the exact same thing. I've got a different sponge dauber. It's very important that you don't want to use the same dauber because you don't want to mix the colors onto your ink pad. The areas that are going to overlap are actually going to turn a third color. So this yellow and this bluish color are going to make a really pretty green. So don't worry if there's a little bit of overlapping. You just want to make sure you don't cover the whole thing. And again, you're looking for the intensity of the color. It's also not important that you work all the way to the edge because, as I said before we started, you're going to want to cut your cardstock a little bit bigger, especially when we get to the next step, which is going to be the embossing. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to repeat this process around the rest of the first color. Now that we have all of our color applied, it certainly doesn't look very pretty, but it's going to work beautifully with the next step. Now this is going to need to sit and dry, or I have a tip for you. The embossing buddy is typically used as an anti-static powder to place down on your cardstock before you ink an image and then add embossing powder. It helps to reflect the small stray pieces of powder from your completed project. But I actually purchased another one, and the second one I used to lay over cardstock that has ink on it. Sometimes that pigmentation will pick up on here, so I'm just going to caution you on that. Otherwise, you can sit and let it dry. I'm going to take it and just tap my embossing buddy over the top of this. That's going to help absorb some of that moisture. So that's one reason why you're going to want to make sure that you have a separate embossing buddy for this. Because I know there's powder on here, I'm going to go ahead and tap that off. And I know my work surface is gritty, so I love to use a piece of a Swiffer dryer sheet just to pick up those small gritty pieces. I don't want those ending up in my ink pad. Now that this is dry, this is prepared for the next step. And now, as decorative and ornate as this is, it certainly didn't look that way when I was finished because the twist to this technique is going to be using Versamark over the stencil or the mask. This stencil comes in a 4-pack with several other images. This one has trees, basic polka dots, and then finally this really pretty leaf pattern. You'll be able to find this stencil as well as all the products I'm using today in the Stampin' Up! Annual Catalog. Now, if you don't already have a demonstrator and you're interested in receiving complimentary copies, head over to lisasstampstudio.com and click on Contact Me, and I'll make sure I include the sale brochure as well. We're going to adhere these 2 pieces together, and the easiest way is to flip this over. So I've got my cardstock upside down. I'm a big fan of the frog tape. This is the delicate surface tape. And you're going to go ahead and just tack down the back of your stencil to the cardstock. We'll do this on 2 sides. I'm going to flip that over, and I want to make sure that I have my embossing powder ready to go for the next step. I'm going to be working over a coffee filter to collect the excess clear embossing powder when I'm finished. I'll be using my Versamark ink pad, and I'm going to turn it upside down, and I am going to press and tap to cover that entire colored surface. You want to press well because you want to make sure that you get ink in those open locations. Once you have it adequately covered, we're going to go ahead and we're going to separate these two layers. This now can go underneath the sink with warm water and mild soap. And I'm going to remove the tape from the back side. This is one reason why we cut the cardstock a little bit bigger so it's easier to hold. I'm going to bring in my coffee filter with my clear embossing powder, and I'm going to work halfway down. And you're going to see it's going to stick to that Versamark ink really, really nice. Now, I know it might be difficult to see here in the video, but once we get this heat set, it's going to be very noticeable. Now that that has been powdered, we're going to go ahead and use the heat tool. I'm going to turn it on to number 2, which is the highest speed, and I'm going to work in one area at a time. You want to make sure that you heat set the entire thing and you don't miss a spot, because if you do, what's going to happen is the powder will rub right off. Powder will turn to a glossy finish, and as the gun gets hot, you're going to find that it conducts the heat and it's going to spread rather quickly. And I'm just going to repeat this process now through the cardstock. One question I get asked quite a bit is, can you overheat emboss it? And the answer is yes. You can actually see that the image would turn brown like it was scorched. So just concentrate on one area and make sure that it's turned that glossy finish before you move on to another area. I'm going to go back over my work surface here one more time with my Swiffer to pick up any stray embossing powder that blew off during the process. That cardstock needs to cool for just a couple seconds, and I'm going to bring in my sponge brayer. These pop off and you're able to add other attachments on here. I absolutely love these. You do get several sponges when you purchase this. I'm going to be using my Memento Black ink pad. And what we're going to do is we're going to lay black ink over the top. And I know, again, you're going to be thinking, ew, but what's going to happen is it's going to resist where there's embossing. You're going to want to make sure that you ink up the brayer all the way around. So you're going to see that I'm lifting it and rolling it as I'm running it across my ink pad. Load it up with lots of ink. You can't use too much. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll it across the cardstock. Now I'm going to work primarily in the top third of my cardstock first. I'm going to come back and I'm going to reload my brayer, and then I'll work my way down. Do you see how the color is peeking through? I'm going to go ahead and repeat this process now by filling the cardstock. How much black you decide to lay on there is entirely up to you. You can certainly make it darker. The next step is to buff the image. So I have a plain white paper towel here, or any soft plain cloth, and I'm going to buff it. What's going to happen is I'm actually removing the excess ink from the embossed area. You're going to see that's transferred off here. So you want to remove that so that the top of your card is nice and clean. And I'm just careful to make sure that I don't curl up the edges of my cardstock. Not only is this going to remove that top layer of ink from the clear embossing area, it's actually allowing the image itself to really pop and makes the colors look more vibrant. Now we're ready to trim it. Because we cut it bigger than we need, you're going to need to trim it down to the size card you're going to create. So I'm going to trim mine down to 4 by 5 1/4. I've got my silicone craft sheet here, and I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to add adhesive to the back side around the outside circumference. I've cut an additional piece of Coastal Cabana cardstock, which coordinates with the ink that we've used. This is just 1/8 of an inch larger than the panel we've just trimmed down. I like to rub from the back just in case I've got ink on my fingers. My card base is basic black. I did score it in half right before you joined me. I'm using my bone folder for a nice crisp edge. And then once again, I'll go ahead and I'll use my silicone craft sheet, and I'll place adhesive on the back side. The silicone craft sheet is a wonderful accompaniment when you're paper crafting. Liquid glue, hot glue, and adhesive will not stick to it. It rubs right off, which means your work surface is going to stay sticky free. This now will get adhered here to the front of the card, and again, there's just a 1/8 inch circumference all the way around, and I'll rub from the back. Let's go ahead and work on our greeting. I have a piece of Mango Melody cardstock here that coordinates with the color ink that we used. I've got my Memento Black ink pad once again, and I'm going to ink up the words Happy Day. I thought this card was so bright and cheerful. I wanted it to have a like greeting. I chose that greeting from the stamp set called Friend Like You, and you'll find this in the annual catalog. I'm going to go ahead and ink that up, and I'm going to stamp that right here in the center of the cardstock. Using my silicone craft sheet once again, because that's a very narrow piece of paper, I'm going to go ahead and add adhesive strips to the back side. I cut another piece of Coastal Cabana that's slightly larger than that, and I'm going to border the top and the bottom, leaving a border of that color to show. This will lead great continuity to the base of our card. I'm going to flip that over, and I'm going to use several full-size dimensionals. Do you see this? I'm sure this has happened to you at home. You've probably cut one layer just a hair too long. So I want to give you a great tip. From the back side, go ahead and take your scissors and use that other piece of paper as a guide to trim away any excess. As careful as we are, we certainly can have a slight overage. I'm going to use my Take Your Pick pickup tool. I've got the paper piercing tool attachment here, and I'm going to remove those paper backings. I didn't want to cover up this gorgeous background, so I placed it right down the center of my card. Here is the card we created together today, the card I created before you joined me. I'm pretty sure that this technique is going to have a whole new spin for you using the stencils that you have at home. Remember, stencils are not just great for this technique, they're wonderful for you to add color, as well as spritzing over and adding other color mediums. If you have enjoyed today's video, please give it a thumbs up here on YouTube, which is a like. It certainly helps, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.